Now, the unprotected strike at Eskom is adding to its inability to provide efficient electricity supply to you and I. The power utility has extended stage 4 blackouts to Wednesday. Workers resorted to striking after a deadlock in wage negotiations. The power utility was granted a court order last week, but the workers are relentless. Let's discuss this further with Labour lawyer Craig Kirchman. Thank you very much, Craig, for your time here on ENCA. Now, Eskom provides an essential service and, as a customer, am I being selfish in saying that the workers shouldn't actually be doing this because then the entire country will suffer?
Good afternoon and thank you for having me. Yes, you are spot on. There is no way for employees who are designated essential service providers to participate in strike action. So there's no scope for them mistakenly believing that they have a right to be on strike. It's not unheard of for there to be confusion about the right to strike in certain circumstances. But in this case, there is no confusion. And if there was any confusion, the interdict obtained last week put that confusion to bed. And really, it is, in my view, entirely unacceptable that employees are striking at this stage.
What sort of action can Eskom take as an employer?
Well, the first step is the step that they took, and that is to obtain an interdict. And one would hope that employees would abide by that interdict. And perhaps more importantly, one would hope that union leaders would take every step available to them to persuade their members to comply with that court order. Disciplinary action, of course, is something that is a little bit of a hollow weapon in the hands of the employer under these circumstances. But the other option that also seems a little bit unsatisfactory in these circumstances is the fact that the Labour Relations Act does make provision for employees and or the union to be sued for compensation for losses arising out of unprotected strike action. Now, this gets really complicated because the vast majority of people suffering and incurring significant costs are not Eskom themselves, or itself rather, but rather the greater society of South Africa. And that really is a concern. Perhaps the bigger concern is the failure to take action properly in the past when we've experienced these problems. So employees have been lulled into a sense of comfort that they can do this with impunity.
How complicated will it be, for instance, if these employees decide that they want to continue even with the interdict at hand?
Well, contempt of court proceedings and literally jail sentences, it can get to that. I haven't seen the wording of the interdict that Eskom obtained last week, but it has become common practice in the recent past to not obtain an interdict only, but also to obtain an order compelling union officials to do certain, or take certain steps rather, in order to bring the strike to an end. And that may be a practical solution. If that order was obtained and union officials aren't doing enough to get their troops back to work, then it may be possible to, at a practical level, institute contempt proceedings against union leaders. And in that regard, while I say I haven't seen what the court order says, I've seen precious little action on the part of union officials to bring order to bear and persuade employees to go back to work. At the moment, I'm hearing more complaints about problems at Eskom rather than the immediate issue being get people back to work in terms of a court order. Obey the court order and talk thereafter. That's what we'd hope, and that's how we run a country in a proper manner.
Exactly. Once, for instance, maybe Eskom decides that some of these employees or all of these employees who did go on this unprotected strike should face disciplinary hearings. And, once you're in a disciplinary hearing, there is huge possibility that you'd be suspended, etc. How long could this go on, especially if the employees decide to fight back, maybe via the CCMA, etc.? Is there that possibility?
Well, unfortunately, with the lawlessness associated with many of our strikes, anything becomes a possibility. But I am pleased to hear that there is talk of going back to the negotiating table, and hopefully when that happens, strike action tends to calm down as well. But of course, we don't only have a problem here of employees striking. We have a problem of intimidation and acts of misconduct over and above the strike action. Now, the fact that employees are on strike is serious misconduct, so some action must be taken. And then, of course, you've got the next level of misconduct during the unprotected strike, which takes it to another level altogether. And I'm convinced that there are ways of identifying perpetrators, so one should be able to take action. But if they in mass remain out, contempt proceedings against appropriate people would be the way to bring that to an end. And of course, the proper way to bring this to an end, if negotiations are going to be unsuccessful and the parties seem fairly far apart, so I'm not optimistic, is to get this matter to the compulsory arbitration that the Labour Relations Act envisages for essential services. And that ought to be presided over by a competent person who would produce a fair result, having due regard to the needs of the employees, the state of Eskom, and financial circumstances. That's the best way to do this, and that's mere compliance with the law. Of course, if they can find each other around the table during the course of the day or very soon, that's great. But I'm not optimistic, so let's get to arbitration.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us here on All Angles and on ENCA.